Dr. Vincent Hawthorne collapsed against the marble wall of his private laboratory, his trembling hands clutching the results that had just destroyed everything he believed about medicine. The crimson liquid in the vial on his desk wasn't just any poison. It was Aconitum Rex, the legendary kingsbane that had killed emperors throughout history, and somehow, impossibly, it had found its way into the bloodstream of 12 patients at his world-renowned medical center in Geneva, Switzerland. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The emergency alarms had been blaring for 6 hours straight, turning the prestigious Hawthorne Medical Institute into a scene from a nightmare. Vincent had built his reputation over 25 years as the world's leading toxicologist, the man governments called when diplomats were poisoned, when industrial accidents threatened entire cities, when the impossible became deadly reality. His laboratory was a fortress of cutting-edge technology, equipped with every antidote known to modern science, staffed by the brightest minds money could recruit from Harvard, Oxford, and Tokyo University. But tonight, all of that expertise felt as useless as ancient bloodletting rituals. The 12 victims lay in the intensive care unit, their bodies systematically shutting down as the Aconitum Rex coursed through their veins like liquid death. Mrs. Eleanor Pemberton, the elderly philanthropist who had donated millions to the hospital, was barely breathing on ventilator support. James Mitchell, the promising young surgeon who had just finished his residency, was experiencing cardiac arrhythmias that no medication could stabilize. Sarah Chen, the brilliant pediatric nurse who had saved countless children's lives, was slipping into organ failure, despite every intervention the medical team could devise. Vincent stared at the computer screens displaying their vital signs, watching helplessly as each patient's condition deteriorated with mechanical precision. The poison was unlike anything he had encountered in his distinguished career. It attacked the nervous system with surgical accuracy, shutting down respiratory function, while simultaneously causing massive inflammation of internal organs. Traditional chelation therapy had proven useless. Activated charcoal couldn't absorb it. Even experimental treatments that had shown promise in animal trials were failing spectacularly. The irony wasn't lost on him that this was happening during the International Medical Conference, where Vincent was supposed to deliver the keynote address on conquering nature's deadliest toxins. 300 of the world's most brilliant doctors, researchers, and pharmaceutical executives were staying at the Grandview Hotel just blocks away, attending lectures about breakthrough treatments and revolutionary antidotes. Yet here he was, the supposed expert, watching people die from a poison that shouldn't even exist in the modern world. Dr. Amanda Foster, Vincent's lead research assistant, burst through the laboratory doors with a stack of test results clutched against her chest. Her usually perfect blonde hair was disheveled, her lab coat stained with coffee and stress sweat. She had been working for 36 hours straight, running every conceivable analysis on blood samples from the victims. "Vincent, I've exhausted every database," Amanda said, her voice cracking with exhaustion and frustration. "The molecular structure of this compound doesn't match any known variant of aconitine. It's like someone took the basic poison and modified it specifically to resist our standard treatments. The protein binding is completely different, the metabolic pathway is altered, and the half-life is 3 times longer than anything we've seen." Vincent rubbed his bloodshot eyes, trying to process the implications. "That's impossible. Aconitum Rex is a historical curiosity, something that killed medieval kings before we understood biochemistry. The plants that produced it were supposedly extinct for centuries." "That's what I thought too," Amanda replied, spreading the laboratory printouts across his desk. "But these molecular markers suggest we're dealing with a hybrid strain, possibly genetically modified. Someone didn't just accidentally stumble across this poison, they engineered it." The weight of that revelation hit Vincent like a physical blow. If Amanda was right, then they weren't dealing with a random poisoning or even a terrorist attack using conventional toxins. Someone had deliberately created a weapon specifically designed to defeat modern medical science, and they had tested it on innocent people at his own hospital. His secure phone rang with the distinctive tone reserved for emergency government communications. Vincent answered on the first ring, knowing it would be Dr. Margaret Thornfield from the World Health Organization's Emergency Response Division. "Vincent, please tell me you have some good news." Margaret's voice was tight with controlled panic. "The media is starting to catch wind of this situation, and I have health ministers from 6 countries demanding answers." The president of Switzerland is personally asking if we need to evacuate Geneva. Vincent stared out the window of his laboratory at the city lights twinkling peacefully below, completely unaware of the medical crisis unfolding in the tower above them. Margaret, I'm going to be completely honest with you. We're dealing with something I've never seen before. Every protocol, every treatment, every antidote in our arsenal has failed. These people are going to die, and I don't know how to stop it. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for several seconds before Margaret spoke again, her diplomatic composure finally cracking. Vincent, you're the best toxicologist in the world. If you can't solve this, then who can? We have reports of similar cases starting to appear in London and New York. This isn't just about your hospital anymore. We could be looking at a global bioterrorism event. Vincent felt the full weight of responsibility crushing down on his shoulders. He had spent his entire career building a reputation as the man who could solve the unsolvable, the doctor who never lost a patient to poison. Medical journals had published dozens of his research papers. Universities competed to offer him teaching positions. Pharmaceutical companies paid him millions in consulting fees because his name on a product guaranteed credibility. But all of that success had been built on conventional toxins, known quantities with established treatment protocols. The Aconitum Rex variant coursing through his patients' bloodstreams was rewriting the rules of toxicology in real time, and his prestigious education, his state-of-the-art equipment, his team of brilliant researchers were all proving inadequate against an enemy they didn't understand. Dr. Robert Sinclair, the hospital's chief administrator, appeared in the laboratory doorway with his usual expression of barely contained anxiety. Robert was a competent businessman who understood hospital operations and medical economics, but he became visibly uncomfortable whenever actual medical crises threatened his carefully managed institution. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his thinning hair unkempt, and his hands shook slightly as he consulted his tablet computer. Vincent, we need to discuss the practical implications of this situation, Robert said, his voice carrying the tone of a man trying to maintain control over circumstances spiraling beyond his comprehension. The families of the affected patients are demanding answers. Mrs. Pemberton's daughter is threatening to contact every media outlet in Europe. The insurance companies are asking questions about our security protocols. And frankly, if we can't resolve this crisis soon, the hospital's reputation will be irreparably damaged. Vincent turned to face Robert with an expression of barely controlled fury. Robert, 12 people are dying upstairs and you're worried about insurance companies and media coverage? This isn't a public relations problem. It's a medical emergency that could spread beyond these walls if we don't find a solution. I understand the medical urgency, Robert replied, his defensive tone revealing his discomfort with the clinical aspects of the crisis. But we also have to consider the broader implications. This hospital employs over 3,000 people and serves patients from around the world. If confidence in our capabilities is shaken, it affects everyone who depends on this institution. Amanda looked up from her computer terminal, where she had been running additional molecular analyses. Vincent, I hate to interrupt, but we have another problem. The blood work from the latest patient shows that the poison is actually becoming more concentrated over time, not less. It's like the toxin is replicating or accumulating in ways that violate everything we know about pharmacokinetics. Vincent studied the new data with growing alarm. In normal poisoning cases, the concentration of toxins decreased over time as the body's natural detoxification processes eliminated the harmful substances. But the Aconitum Rex variant appeared to be defying biological logic, somehow becoming more lethal as hours passed instead of less dangerous. This is scientifically impossible, Vincent muttered, scrolling through the test results on Amanda's screen. Toxins don't replicate like viruses. They're chemical compounds that follow predictable metabolic pathways. Unless... He trailed off as a terrible possibility occurred to him. Amanda, run a full-spectrum analysis on the cellular samples. Look for any evidence of synthetic nanoparticles or engineered delivery mechanisms. If someone has combined traditional plant toxins with nanotechnology, it could explain why our treatments aren't working. Amanda's eyes widened as she understood the implications. You think someone has created a hybrid bioweapon that uses nanotechnology to enhance and sustain the toxic effects? It would explain everything, Vincent said grimly. The unusual molecular structure, the resistance to conventional antidotes, the increasing concentration over time. Someone has weaponized medieval poison with 21st-century technology. The laboratory door opened quietly as Elena Vasquez entered with her evening cleaning supplies. The 54-year-old woman from Honduras had been maintaining the laboratory's pristine condition for over a decade, working the night shift when the researchers went home and the expensive equipment hummed quietly in standby mode. She was so much a part of the laboratory's routine that the doctors barely noticed her presence, focusing on their urgent work while she efficiently cleaned around them. Elena had witnessed countless medical emergencies over the years, had observed the researchers' triumphs and failures from the periphery of their professional lives. She understood enough English to follow their conversations, had absorbed fragments of their scientific discussions through years of proximity to their work. Always professional, always invisible, always careful not to interfere with the important business of saving lives. But tonight was different. Elena could see the desperation in Dr. Hawthorne's posture, could hear the fear in his voice as he spoke with the government officials and hospital administrators. She had watched the stream of ambulances arriving throughout the evening, had seen the faces of family members gathered in the waiting rooms below. The usual confidence that radiated from this laboratory had been replaced by something she had never seen before: complete helplessness. Elena began her methodical cleaning routine, starting with the computer workstations where Amanda had been analyzing blood samples. As she carefully dusted around the delicate equipment, she couldn't help but notice the molecular diagrams displayed on the monitors. The complex chemical structures looked familiar somehow, triggering a memory from long ago that she couldn't quite place. Vincent was pacing between the laboratory benches, his frustration evident in every movement. "We're missing something fundamental," he said to Amanda. "This poison is behaving like nothing in the literature, but poisons don't just appear out of nowhere. Someone, somewhere, has seen something like this before." Amanda pulled up another database on her computer, this one containing historical records of poisoning cases from around the world. "I've been searching through centuries of documented cases, looking for any mention of similar symptoms or treatment approaches. But most historical accounts are too vague to be medically useful. They describe symptoms and outcomes, but they don't provide the biochemical details we need to develop effective treatments." Elena paused in her cleaning, the conversation triggering stronger memories now. She remembered her grandmother's stories about the old remedies, the traditional healing practices that had been passed down through generations of indigenous healers in the mountains of Honduras. Plants and preparations that weren't found in modern medical textbooks, but had saved lives long before hospitals and laboratories existed. Vincent's phone rang again, and this time his voice carried a note of panic as he answered. "Dr. Hawthorne speaking." He listened for several moments, his face growing pale. "How many? When did the symptoms begin? Are you certain it's the same compound?" He ended the call and turned to Amanda with a look of complete defeat. "That was Dr. Mitchell from London General Hospital. They have 15 patients with identical symptoms, and 3 more cases just appeared at Mount Sinai in New York. Whatever this is, it's spreading internationally, and we still don't have any effective treatment." Robert, who had been quietly observing the medical discussions while managing the administrative crisis, stepped forward with visible anxiety. "Vincent, I need to know if we should be considering evacuation procedures for the hospital. If this toxin is somehow contagious or if there's a risk of additional exposure, we have a responsibility to protect our other patients and staff." "It's not contagious," Vincent replied wearily. "The victims were all exposed to the same source, probably contaminated food or water at some event they attended together. But you're right about the broader implications. If terrorists or criminals have access to this modified Aconitum Rex, they could strike anywhere, anytime, and we have no defense against it." Elena finished cleaning the computer workstation and moved to the laboratory benches where various chemical samples were stored in temperature-controlled containers. As she carefully wiped down the surfaces, she found herself studying the labels on the sample containers more closely than usual. Most were standard pharmaceutical compounds and research chemicals, but one particular vial caught her attention. The label read, "Aconitum Rex patient sample 7 inches" in Dr. Hawthorne's precise handwriting. Elena stared at the dark liquid inside the vial, and suddenly the memories crystallized with perfect clarity. She had seen something very similar before, not in a modern laboratory, but in her grandmother's traditional healing practice in the remote mountains of Honduras. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Her grandmother, Esperanza Vasquez, had been a curandera, a traditional healer who served indigenous communities that had no access to modern medical care. Esperanza had learned her craft from generations of healers who had preserved ancient knowledge about medicinal and poisonous plants that grew in the Central American highlands. Among the most dangerous substances in her grandmother's collection had been a plant the local healers called Muerte del Rey, the king's death. Elena remembered being a young girl, watching her grandmother carefully prepare remedies in their small mountain home. Esperanza had taught her about the dual nature of many plants, how the same substance that could kill in large doses could heal in tiny amounts, how traditional knowledge often contains solutions that modern science had forgotten or never discovered. The Muerte del Rey had been particularly feared and respected among the traditional healers. It grew only in specific microclimates at high altitudes, and its preparation required knowledge that had been passed down through oral tradition for centuries. But Elena also remembered her grandmother's stories about the antidote, a complex preparation that could counteract even the most potent doses of the king's death. Elena glanced around the laboratory, watching Dr. Hawthorne and his team struggling with their sophisticated equipment and computer databases. They were brilliant researchers, but their knowledge was limited to compounds that had been documented in scientific literature. The traditional healing practices of indigenous communities weren't taught in medical schools or published in peer-reviewed journals, but Elena's grandmother had taught her that true healing required understanding both the poison and its natural counterpart, that nature rarely created a deadly substance without also providing a remedy for those who knew where to look. The antidote for Muerte del Rey wasn't a single compound, but a complex mixture of plants that had to be prepared in a very specific way, at precisely the right time, using techniques that couldn't be replicated by modern pharmaceutical methods. Elena finished her cleaning routine and prepared to leave the laboratory, but she found herself hesitating at the door. The doctors were so focused on their technological approaches that they weren't considering alternatives that existed outside their scientific framework. She could hear Drive Hawthorne on another conference call with international medical authorities, his voice growing more desperate as he reported their lack of progress. As Elena quietly gathered her cleaning supplies, she made a decision that would change everything. She approached Dr. Hawthorne's desk where he was reviewing the latest test results, her heart pounding with nervousness about speaking up after years of maintaining professional invisibility. "Dr. Hawthorne," she said softly, her accented English careful and respectful. "I apologize for interrupting your important work, but I could not help noticing the symptoms you have been discussing. The poison that is affecting your patients, it sounds very similar to something my grandmother encountered in our traditional healing practice." Vincent looked up from his computer screen with a mixture of surprise and polite dismissal. Elena was part of the invisible workforce that kept the hospital functioning, but she wasn't someone he would normally consult about complex toxicological problems. His mind was focused on scientific solutions, peer-reviewed research, and consultation with international experts. "Thank you for your concern, Elena," Vincent replied absently, already turning his attention back to the laboratory data. "But we're dealing with a very sophisticated bioweapon that requires advanced medical intervention. I appreciate your thoughts, but traditional remedies aren't going to be effective against genetically modified toxins." Elena nodded respectfully, understanding his dismissal but also recognizing the limitations of his perspective. She had spent years observing the brilliant work conducted in this laboratory, had developed deep respect for the doctor's expertise and dedication. But she had also seen how their scientific training sometimes created blind spots that prevented them from considering solutions that existed outside their formal education. As Elena prepared to leave the laboratory, Amanda called out from her computer workstation with growing excitement. "Vincent, I think I found something significant in the historical database. There's a reference from a 16th century Spanish colonial report about indigenous healers in Central America who successfully treated victims of a poison they called Muerte del Rey, the king's death. The symptoms described in the colonial documents are remarkably similar to what we're seeing in our patients." Vincent immediately shifted his attention to Amanda's discovery, his exhaustion momentarily forgotten. "What kind of treatment did they use? Are there any details about their methods or the substances they employed?" Amanda scrolled through the digitized historical documents on her screen. The Spanish chronicler wrote that the indigenous healers used a complex mixture of plants that had to be prepared according to very specific procedures. He mentions that the antidote was considered sacred knowledge, passed down through generations of healers who guarded the secrets carefully. but the document doesn't provide enough detail to identify the actual plants or preparation methods. Elena paused at the laboratory door, listening to their conversation with growing realization that the knowledge they desperately needed was within her reach. Her grandmother had been one of those traditional healers mentioned in the historical accounts, and the oral traditions Amanda was reading about had been passed down directly to Elena through years of apprenticeship in the mountain villages of Honduras. But Elena also understood that her knowledge would be difficult for the doctors to accept. Traditional healing was often dismissed as superstition by medical professionals who had been trained to trust only treatments that could be validated through clinical trials and laboratory analysis. The preparation techniques her grandmother had taught her couldn't be replicated using standard pharmaceutical procedures, and the effectiveness of the antidote depended on factors that modern science struggled to quantify. Dr. Hawthorne was now fully engaged with Amanda's historical research, searching through additional colonial documents for any mention of the traditional treatments. "This could be exactly what we need," he said with the first hope he had felt all day. "If indigenous healers successfully treated this type of poisoning centuries ago, then there must be natural compounds that can counteract the Aconitum Rex variant. We just need to identify the active ingredients and synthesize them in the laboratory." Elena realized that this was her moment to speak up, that the doctor's desperate search for solutions had created an opening for her traditional knowledge to be heard. She approached Dr. Hawthorne's desk again, this time with greater confidence and urgency. "Dr. Hawthorne," Elena said more firmly, "the historical documents you are reading about, those traditional healers were my grandmother's people. The knowledge they used to treat Muerte del Rey was passed down to my grandmother, and she taught it to me when I was young. I believe I know how to prepare the antidote your patients need." This time, Vincent looked at Elena with complete attention, his scientific skepticism warring with his desperate need for any solution that might save his dying patients. Amanda turned from her computer screen to study Elena with new interest, suddenly realizing that the quiet cleaning woman might possess exactly the information they had been frantically searching for in historical databases and medical literature. "Elena," Vincent said carefully, "what exactly do you know about treating this type of poisoning? And how can you be certain that traditional remedies would be effective against a genetically modified toxin?" Elena met his gaze steadily, drawing on the confidence her grandmother had instilled in her during their years of training together. "My grandmother, Esperanza Vasquez, was a curandera who served mountain communities in Honduras for over 50 years. She learned from healers whose knowledge went back centuries, to before the Spanish conquest. The Muerte del Rey that poisoned people in our region was the same plant that appears in your historical documents, and my grandmother successfully treated many victims using methods that were passed down through oral tradition." Vincent studied Elena's face, trying to reconcile his image of her as a cleaning woman with this revelation about her connection to traditional healing practices. "But Elena, even if your grandmother's remedies worked on the original plant toxin, we're dealing with a modified version that has been engineered to resist conventional treatments. How can traditional methods be effective against modern bioweapons?" Elena nodded, understanding his scientific concerns while also recognizing the limitations of his technological approach. "Dr. Hawthorne, my grandmother taught me that the plants we used for healing contained many compounds that worked together in ways that individual chemicals could not. She said that when people tried to isolate single ingredients from traditional remedies, they lost the balance that made the medicine effective. The antidote from Muerte del Rey was not one plant, but a combination that had to be prepared in very specific ways." Amanda leaned forward from her computer workstation, her research instincts engaged by Elena's explanation. "Elena, can you describe the symptoms that your grandmother's patients experienced, and what exactly was involved in preparing the antidote?" Elena closed her eyes briefly, accessing memories that she had not revisited for many years. "The victims of Muerte del Rey experienced difficulty breathing, irregular heartbeat, and gradual organ failure, just like your patients upstairs. My grandmother's antidote required 7 different plants that grew at specific elevations in our mountains. The preparation had to begin during certain phases of the moon, and the plants had to be combined in a particular sequence using traditional methods that could not be rushed." Vincent felt a surge of hope mixed with scientific skepticism. The symptoms Elena described were indeed identical to what they were observing in their patients. and her mention of multiple plant compounds working synergistically aligned with recent research on the limitations of single-compound pharmaceutical approaches. But the references to lunar phases and traditional timing seemed like superstition that had no place in modern medical treatment. "Elena," Vincent said thoughtfully, "I appreciate the information about your grandmother's methods, but we need treatments that can be prepared quickly and administered under controlled conditions. Our patients don't have time for traditional preparation rituals, and we need to be certain about dosages and potential side effects." Elena understood his concerns, but she also recognized that his urgency was preventing him from grasping the full implications of what she was offering. "Dr. Hawthorne, I know the preparation seems complicated, but my grandmother taught me that the timing and methods were not superstition. They were necessary for the medicine to work properly. The plants had to be harvested when their active compounds were at peak concentration, and the combination process activated chemical interactions that could not happen any other way." Dr. Foster looked up from her research with sudden excitement. "Vincent, Elena might be onto something significant. I've been reading about ethnobotanical research that shows traditional preparation methods often optimize the bioavailability of active compounds in ways that laboratory synthesis cannot replicate. If indigenous healers successfully treated this type of poisoning for centuries, their methods might contain biochemical insights that modern pharmacology has overlooked." Vincent began pacing again, but this time his movement was driven by possibilities rather than frustration. "Even if Elena's information is accurate, we don't have access to plants that grow in the mountains of Honduras. Our patients are dying right now, and we can't wait for traditional ingredients to be shipped from Central America." Elena had anticipated this concern, and she reached into her cleaning cart to retrieve a small wooden box that she always carried with her. The box had belonged to her grandmother and contained a collection of dried medicinal plants that Elena had maintained as a connection to her heritage and family traditions. "Dr. Hawthorne," Elena said, opening the wooden box to reveal carefully preserved plant specimens, each wrapped in traditional cloth and labeled in her grandmother's handwriting. "My grandmother gave me this collection before she passed away. She told me to always keep these medicines with me, because I never knew when someone might need healing that could not be found in modern hospitals. These are the plants used for the Muerte del Rey antidote." Vincent stared at the contents of Elena's box with amazement, recognizing some of the plant specimens from his studies of ethnobotanical toxicology while being completely unfamiliar with others. The preservation was remarkable, and the methodical organization suggested a level of scientific rigor that challenged his assumptions about traditional healing practices. Amanda approached the box with her research instincts fully engaged. "Elena, these specimens are incredibly well preserved. How did your grandmother maintain their potency over so many years? And how can we determine if they still contain the active compounds needed for the antidote?" Elena smiled slightly, remembering her grandmother's meticulous attention to the details that ensured her medicines remained effective. "My grandmother taught me that proper preservation was just as important as proper preparation. These plants were harvested at the optimal time, dried using specific techniques, and stored in conditions that maintain their healing properties for many years. She said that good medicine required understanding every step of the process, from growing the plants to administering the final remedy." Vincent studied the plant specimens more closely, his scientific training allowing him to identify some of the species, while others remained completely unfamiliar. "Elena, even if these plants contain the compounds we need, we still face the problem of dosage and administration. Traditional healing methods might have worked for your grandmother's patients, but we need precise measurements and controlled delivery systems for critically ill patients in modern medical settings." Elena nodded, understanding his medical concerns while also recognizing that his technological focus was still limiting his ability to fully appreciate what she was offering. "Dr. Hawthorne, my grandmother's treatments were not imprecise. She calculated dosages based on the patient's size, condition, and the severity of the poisoning. She understood interactions between different medicines and how to adjust treatments when patients had other health problems. Traditional healing required just as much knowledge and skill as modern medicine, but the knowledge was organized differently." The laboratory door opened as Robert returned with an expression of barely controlled panic. "Vincent, I just received calls from the families of 3 more patients whose conditions have deteriorated significantly. Mrs. Pemberton's daughter is threatening to transfer her mother to another hospital, and the media is starting to ask questions about our handling of this crisis. We need to show some progress soon." or the situation is going to spiral completely out of control. Vincent felt the familiar weight of responsibility crushing down on him again, but this time it was accompanied by a glimmer of hope that hadn't existed before Elena's revelations. Robert, we may have found a lead on a potential treatment approach. Elena has information about traditional remedies that were used to treat similar poisoning cases centuries ago. Robert looked at Elena with surprise and barely concealed skepticism. Vincent, I understand you're exploring every possible option, but are we really considering folk remedies when we have access to the most advanced medical technology in the world? The families and media are expecting cutting-edge treatments, not traditional healing practices. Elena remained calm in the face of Robert's dismissal, having encountered similar attitudes throughout her years of working in environments where her background and knowledge were considered irrelevant to important decisions. But she also understood that the institutional pressures Robert represented could prevent the doctors from considering solutions that existed outside their conventional framework. Mr. Sinclair, Elena said respectfully, I understand your concerns about the hospital's reputation and the expectations of families. But sometimes the most advanced solutions are found by combining modern knowledge with traditional wisdom that has been tested over many generations. If my grandmother's methods can save these patients, does it matter whether the treatment comes from a modern laboratory or from plants that have been healing people for centuries? Vincent was impressed by Elena's composure and the thoughtful way she had addressed Robert's institutional concerns. Robert, at this point we have to consider every possible approach. Our conventional treatments have completely failed, and Elena's information represents the only lead we have on historically successful treatments for this type of poisoning. Amanda looked up from her computer where she had been researching the ethnobotanical properties of the plants in Elena's collection. Vincent, I've been running database searches on some of these plant species, and the preliminary information is fascinating. Several contain alkaloids that could theoretically counteract the mechanisms we've identified in the Aconitum Rex variant. Elena's grandmother's antidote appears to be a sophisticated combination of compounds that work through multiple pathways simultaneously. Elena felt a surge of validation hearing Amanda's scientific analysis of her grandmother's traditional knowledge. Dr. Foster, my grandmother always said that the power of the antidote came from the way different plants work together. She taught me that single plants could be helpful, but the complete cure required understanding how all the ingredients supported each other. Vincent was beginning to recognize that Elena's traditional knowledge might contain biochemical insights that their modern approach had missed. Elena, if we were to attempt preparing your grandmother's antidote using the plants in your collection, what would be involved? And how quickly could the treatment be ready for our patients? Elena opened her wooden box completely, revealing not just the dried plant specimens but also traditional preparation tools that her grandmother had used for decades. The basic preparation can be completed in 6 hours, but it requires following the traditional methods exactly. Modern laboratory equipment might actually interfere with the chemical processes that make the antidote effective. Vincent felt his scientific training rebelling against the idea of abandoning controlled laboratory conditions, but he also recognized that their high-tech approach had produced no results whatsoever. Elena, our patients are in critical condition and deteriorating rapidly. Are you confident that your grandmother's methods would be effective against the modified poison we're dealing with? Elena met his gaze with the quiet confidence that her grandmother had instilled in her during years of training and apprenticeship. Dr. Hawthorne, I cannot promise that traditional methods will save every patient, because healing is always uncertain. But I can promise that my grandmother's antidote has saved people who were dying from Muerte del Rey poisoning, and the symptoms were identical to what your patients are experiencing. If modern medicine cannot help them, then perhaps it is time to try the old wisdom. The laboratory fell silent as Vincent, Amanda, and Robert contemplated the implications of Elena's offer. Everything about their medical training and institutional framework suggested that traditional remedies were inferior to modern pharmaceutical approaches. But their sophisticated technology and extensive expertise had proven completely inadequate against the bioweapon that was systematically killing their patients. Vincent looked around his state-of-the-art laboratory, filled with equipment worth millions of dollars and staffed by researchers with decades of advanced education. Then he looked at Elena, a cleaning woman whose grandmother's wooden box might contain the solution they desperately needed. The choice he was about to make would challenge everything he believed about medicine, science, and the nature of healing itself. Outside the laboratory windows, the lights of Geneva twinkled peacefully in the darkness, unaware that the fate of patients around the world might depend on whether a renowned toxicologist was willing to trust the traditional knowledge of a woman whose expertise had been invisible to him for over a decade. Vincent took a deep breath and made the decision that would either save 12 lives or destroy his career. "Elena, I want you to prepare your grandmother's antidote. We'll monitor the process and assist in any way we can, but I'm putting my faith in your traditional knowledge." Elena nodded solemnly, understanding the enormous responsibility that Dr. Hawthorne was placing in her hands. She had never prepared the complete Muerte del Rey antidote without her grandmother's direct guidance. But the memory of every step, every detail, every subtle technique remained vivid in her mind. Her grandmother had made her practice the preparation countless times, insisting that true healing knowledge required perfect recall and absolute precision. "Dr. Hawthorne, I will need a quiet space where I can work without interruption," Elena said, her voice carrying a new authority that reflected her shift from invisible cleaning woman to essential healer. "The preparation requires complete concentration, and the timing must be exact. Also, I will need access to clean water that has not been treated with chemicals, and a heat source that can be carefully controlled." Amanda immediately began clearing one of the smaller laboratory rooms, moving expensive equipment to make space for Elena's traditional preparation methods. "Elena, we have distilled water and precise temperature control systems. Will those work for your purposes, or do you need something more specific?" Elena examined the laboratory's water purification system and heating equipment, comparing them to the natural springs and wood fires her grandmother had used in the mountains of Honduras. "These will work well, Dr. Foster. My grandmother always said that the most important ingredient was the healer's knowledge and intention, not the sophistication of the tools." Robert watched the preparations with visible anxiety, clearly uncomfortable with the idea of abandoning modern medical protocols in favor of what he still viewed as folk remedies. "Vincent, I understand we're in a desperate situation, but how will we explain to the patients' families that we're treating their loved ones with traditional healing methods? And what about our liability if something goes wrong?" Vincent turned to face Robert with an expression of grim determination. "Robert, our liability is already enormous because our conventional treatments have completely failed. At this point, Elena's traditional knowledge represents our only hope of saving these patients. I'd rather take responsibility for trying an unconventional approach than for watching people die while we stick to protocols that aren't working." Elena began removing the dried plant specimens from her grandmother's wooden box, handling each one with the reverence and precision that Esperanza had taught her. The plants had to be examined carefully before use, checked for proper preservation and potency. Her grandmother had always said that healing began with respect for the medicines themselves, understanding that each plant had sacrificed its life to serve the greater purpose of saving human lives. "Dr. Foster, could you please document everything I do?" Elena asked as she arranged the plant specimens on a clean laboratory bench. "My grandmother always said that knowledge should be shared, not hoarded. If this antidote works, other healers should be able to learn from our experience." Amanda set up video recording equipment and prepared detailed laboratory notebooks to capture every aspect of Elena's preparation process. Her scientific training was fascinated by the opportunity to observe traditional healing methods in action, and she recognized that they might be witnessing the preservation of ancient knowledge that could prove invaluable for future medical research. Elena began by carefully measuring small quantities of each plant, using not the precision scales available in the laboratory, but her grandmother's traditional measurement techniques. She explained that the proper dosages were determined by the size of the patient's hand, the rhythm of their breathing, and other physical indicators that connected the medicine to the individual being treated. "The first plant is called Corazón de la Montaña, the heart of the mountain," Elena said, holding up a dried root that resembled gnarled fingers. "My grandmother taught me that this plant calms the irregular heartbeat that comes with Muerte del Rey poisoning. But it must be prepared first, because it takes the longest time to release its healing properties." She placed the root in a ceramic bowl and began grinding it with a traditional stone pestle, using circular motions that created a rhythm almost like a heartbeat. The grinding continued for exactly 27 minutes, timed not by clocks but by Elena's internal sense of the plant's readiness, knowledge that had been passed down through generations of healers who worked without modern timepieces. Vincent watched the grinding process with fascination, recognizing that Elena's technique was releasing aromatic compounds that filled the room with a complex, earthy scent. His scientific training wanted to analyze the chemical composition of what Elena was creating, but he forced himself to observe without interfering, understanding that premature analysis might disrupt processes he didn't yet comprehend. "The grinding pattern is very important," Elena explained as she worked. "My grandmother said that the circular motion helps the plant remember its connection to the earth and the cycles of healing. Modern machines might grind more quickly, but they cannot create the same energy that comes from human hands working with intention and respect." The second plant Elena selected was a delicate leaf that she called Respiración del Cielo, the breath of heaven. This plant addressed the respiratory difficulties that were killing the patients upstairs, but it required a completely different preparation method. Instead of grinding, Elena placed the leaves in a small ceramic pot with carefully measured amounts of the purified water. "This plant must be steeped like tea, but at a very specific temperature," Elena said, testing the water with her finger in a way that made Vincent nervous about contamination, but which Elena insisted was necessary to ensure the plant released its properties at exactly the right moment. "Too hot, and the healing compounds are destroyed. Too cool, and they never activate properly." Amanda was furiously taking notes, trying to capture not just Elena's actions, but also her explanations of the reasoning behind each step. "Elena, how did your grandmother determine the correct temperature for each plant? Did she use any kind of measurement system?" Elena smiled, remembering her grandmother's patient teaching during their years of work together. "My grandmother could tell the temperature by how the water felt against her skin, by the way steam rose from the surface, by the sound the bubbles made when the water was heated. She said that healers had to use all their senses, not just their eyes and their minds." The third plant required an even more unusual preparation method. Elena called it sangre de la tierra, the blood of the earth, and it had to be prepared using a technique that seemed to violate every principle of sterile laboratory procedure. Elena actually had to choose small pieces of the plant, allowing her saliva to begin the activation process before spitting the mixture into another ceramic bowl. Vincent's medical training rebelled against what appeared to be contamination of the medicine, but Amanda had been researching ethnobotanical preparation methods, and she understood the biochemical reasoning behind Elena's technique. Vincent Saivuhua's saliva contains enzymes that can activate certain plant compounds in ways that laboratory processing cannot replicate. Elena's method might actually be necessary for the medicine to work properly. Elena continued chewing the plant material, timing the process by internal rhythms that her grandmother had taught her to recognize. "This plant is the most powerful of all, but also the most dangerous if not prepared correctly. It must be activated by human enzymes, but only for exactly the right amount of time. Too little, and it has no effect. Too much, and it becomes toxic instead of healing." Robert watched the preparation process with growing alarm, clearly concerned about the unorthodox methods Elena was employing. "Vincent, this is looking less and less like medical treatment, and more like some kind of primitive ritual. How can we be certain that Elena's methods won't actually harm the patients more than help them?" Elena paused in her work to address Robert's concerns directly. "Mr. Sinclair, I understand that my methods look strange to people trained in modern medicine, but my grandmother used these same techniques to save many people over 50 years of practice. Traditional healing has been tested by time and experience in ways that laboratory medicines cannot match." Vincent was beginning to appreciate the sophisticated knowledge underlying Elena's seemingly simple techniques. "Robert, what Elena is doing actually makes biochemical sense when you understand the chemistry involved. She's using natural enzymes in carefully controlled conditions to activate plant compounds in ways that might be impossible to replicate using standard pharmaceutical processes." The fourth plant Elena selected was called Lagrimas de los Ancestros, the tears of the ancestors, and it required preparation that involved exposing the plant material to moonlight that filtered through the laboratory windows. Elena positioned the ceramic bowl containing the plant exactly where the natural light could reach it, explaining that this step connected the medicine to the natural cycles that had governed healing for thousands of years. "My grandmother taught me that some plants must remember their connection to the moon and stars before they can heal human beings," Elena said, carefully adjusting the position of the bowl as the moon moved across the sky. "Modern people think this is superstition, but the plants know the difference between artificial light and the natural rhythms that have guided life on Earth since the beginning of time." Amanda was fascinated by the astronomical component of Elena's preparation, recognizing that lunar cycles did indeed affect the chemical composition of many plants. Elena, modern research has shown that the concentration of active compounds in medicinal plants does vary according to lunar phases and celestial cycles. Your grandmother's methods might be based on biochemical principles that science is only beginning to understand. The fifth plant required preparation that involved singing, something that made Robert visibly uncomfortable, but which Elena insisted was essential for the antidote's effectiveness. Elena began humming a melody her grandmother had taught her, a traditional healing song that had been passed down through generations of curanderas in the mountains of Honduras. The plants respond to vibration and sound, Elena explained as she continued her quiet singing while measuring precise amounts of the plant material. My grandmother said that healing songs help the plants remember their purpose, help them release their power in service of life rather than death. The melody must be exactly right, because each plant has its own song that calls forth its healing properties. Vincent found himself oddly moved by Elena's singing, recognizing that the melody seemed to create a sense of calm and focus that affected everyone in the laboratory. Even Robert's anxiety appeared to diminish as Elena's voice filled the room with the ancient healing tradition she was channeling through her work. The sixth plant was perhaps the most mysterious of all. Elena called it Guardian del Umbral, the guardian of the threshold, and she explained that this plant helped the soul remain connected to the body during the critical moments when death was approaching. The preparation required Elena to hold the plant material in her hands while concentrating intensely on the patients upstairs, creating what she described as a spiritual connection between the medicine and the people who needed healing. This plant works not just on the body, but on the spirit, Elena said, her voice taking on a deeper quality as she focused her attention on the visualization her grandmother had taught her. When people are very sick, sometimes their souls begin to separate from their bodies. This medicine helps them remember why they want to stay alive, helps them find the strength to fight for their lives. Amanda was documenting everything, but she found herself affected by the spiritual dimension of Elena's work in ways that her scientific training hadn't prepared her for. Elena, what you're describing sounds like what modern medicine calls the placebo effect, but much more sophisticated. You're working with psychological and spiritual factors that conventional treatment often ignores. Elena nodded, appreciating Amanda's attempt to understand traditional healing within a scientific framework while also recognizing the limitations of that approach. Dr. Foster, my grandmother always said that healing the body without healing the spirit was like trying to save a house while ignoring the foundation. Modern medicine is very good at treating symptoms, but sometimes it forgets that people are more than just physical bodies. The seventh and final plant was called Renacimiento, the rebirth, and Elena explained that this plant had to be added last because it activated all the other ingredients and created the synergistic effect that made the complete antidote effective. The preparation of this plant required perfect timing, as it had to be combined with the other ingredients at the exact moment when their chemical properties were optimally balanced. Elena had been working for nearly 5 hours, and the laboratory was filled with complex aromas that seemed to change and evolve as the different plant preparations reached various stages of readiness. Vincent realized that he was witnessing something far more sophisticated than simple folk remedies. Elena's traditional knowledge represented a complete system of healing that integrated chemistry, biology, psychology, and spirituality in ways that modern medicine had largely abandoned. Dr. Hawthorne, Elena said, the antidote is almost ready, but now comes the most critical part. I must combine all 7 preparations in exactly the right sequence, at exactly the right moment. Once I begin this final step, the process cannot be stopped or repeated. If I make any mistake, we will have to start over from the beginning, and your patients may not have time for a second attempt. Vincent felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders again, but this time, it was accompanied by genuine hope for the first time since the crisis had begun. Elena, you've brought us further than all our modern technology and expertise combined. I trust your knowledge and your skill. Please proceed with the final preparation. Elena took a deep breath and began the complex process of combining the 7 plant preparations. Each one had to be added in a specific order, with precise timing between additions, while Elena maintained the visualization and spiritual connection that would bind the medicine's power to the patients who needed healing. Her movements were graceful and confident, reflecting years of training and a deep understanding of the healing process. As Elena worked, she explained that the combination sequence was based on the natural progression of the body's healing response. The first plants addressed the immediate symptoms, calming the heart and supporting breathing. The middle plants worked to neutralize the poison and support the organs under attack. The final plants activated the body's own healing mechanisms and provided the spiritual strength needed for recovery. "Now," Elena said, holding the completed antidote in a ceramic bowl that seemed to glow with warm golden light, "we must take this medicine to your patients immediately." "But Dr. Hawthorne, you must understand that this antidote works differently from modern medicines. It does not simply suppress symptoms or override the body's responses. Instead, it supports and enhances the natural healing processes that the poison has disrupted." Vincent studied the liquid in Elena's bowl, noting its unusual color and the way it seemed to shimmer with properties he couldn't identify. "Elena, how should this antidote be administered, and how quickly should we expect to see results?" Elena rose from her work area, cradling the antidote with the same reverence she had shown throughout the preparation process. Each patient should receive 3 small sips, spaced exactly 20 minutes apart. The medicine works slowly but deeply, healing not just the immediate damage, but also strengthening the body's ability to resist future attacks. Some patients may show improvement within hours, while others may need several days to fully recover. As they prepared to leave the laboratory and take the antidote to the intensive care unit, Elena turned to address the concerns she knew Vincent and Robert still harbored about the unconventional treatment they were about to administer. "Dr. Hawthorne, I know this medicine seems very different from what you are accustomed to using, but my grandmother treated many people with muerte del rey poisoning, and her success rate was higher than what modern hospitals achieve with many conditions. Traditional healing works because it addresses the whole person, not just the disease." Vincent nodded, recognizing that Elena's holistic approach might indeed be more effective than their reductionist focus on individual symptoms and isolated biochemical pathways. "Elena, at this point I'm convinced that your grandmother's knowledge represents medical insights that we've lost in our rush to embrace technological solutions. Let's go save some lives." The intensive care unit was eerily quiet when they arrived, with only the sounds of ventilators and monitoring equipment breaking the silence. The 12 patients lay motionless in their beds, their vital signs indicating continued deterioration, despite all the advanced life support measures the hospital could provide. Family members sat in chairs beside the beds, their faces showing the strain of watching their loved ones slip away, despite being surrounded by the most sophisticated medical technology available. Elena approached the first patient, Mrs. Eleanor Pemberton, and gently lifted her head to administer the first dose of antidote. The elderly philanthropist was barely conscious, but Elena spoke to her softly in Spanish and English, explaining what the medicine was and asking for her body's cooperation in the healing process. Vincent watched in fascination as Elena's approach transformed the administration of medicine from a clinical procedure into a personal interaction between healer and patient. "Mrs. Pemberton," Elena said softly, "this medicine comes from plants that have been healing people for many generations. Your body knows how to use this healing power, but you must choose to fight for your life. Your family needs you, and there is still much good work for you to do in this world." The effect was subtle but unmistakable. Mrs. Pemberton's breathing seemed to deepen slightly, and her heart rate stabilized in a way that the electronic monitors immediately detected. Vincent checked the readings on the medical equipment, noting improvements that were small but statistically significant. Elena moved to the next patient, James Mitchell, the young surgeon whose promising career had been interrupted by the mysterious poisoning. She administered the antidote with the same gentle care, speaking to him about his calling to heal others and his responsibility to survive so that he could continue serving patients who would need his skills. "Dr. Mitchell," Elena said, "you have spent years learning to save lives. Now you must use that same determination to save your own life. The medicine I am giving you will help, but the choice to live must come from within your own spirit." Patient by patient, Elena made her way through the intensive care unit, administering the traditional antidote, while providing each person with personalized encouragement based on what she had observed about their lives and relationships during her years of working in the hospital. Her approach was the complete opposite of the impersonal, protocol-driven treatment the patients had been receiving from the conventional medical team. Amanda followed Elena throughout the process, continuing to document everything for potential future research, while also monitoring the patient's vital signs for any immediate changes. Elena, I'm seeing slight but consistent improvements in respiratory function and cardiac stability across all the patients who have received the antidote. The changes are subtle, but they're definitely moving in the right direction. Vincent felt hope growing stronger as he observed the patient's responses to Elena's treatment. The improvements are undeniable, but how long should we expect the healing process to take? And what should we watch for as indicators of the antidote's effectiveness? Elena finished administering the first round of doses and turned to explain the recovery timeline based on her grandmother's experience with similar cases. Dr. Hawthorne, the healing will happen in stages. First, the patient's breathing and heartbeat will stabilize. Then, the organ damage will begin to reverse as the poison is neutralized. Finally, their consciousness will return as their bodies regain strength. The complete process usually takes between 1 and 3 days, depending on how much poison they received and how strong their natural healing capacity is. Robert had been watching the entire process with a mixture of fascination and anxiety, clearly struggling to reconcile his institutional responsibilities with the unconventional methods Elena was employing. Elena, what you're doing is certainly compelling, but how will we explain these treatment methods to the patients' families and to the medical authorities who are monitoring this crisis? Elena considered Robert's concerns while preparing for the second round of antidote doses that would need to be administered 20 minutes after the first. Mr. Sinclair, healing has always required trust between patients, families, and healers. My grandmother taught me that people can understand and accept unconventional treatments when they see that the methods work, and when they feel that the healer truly cares about their loved one's recovery. As if summoned by their conversation, Mrs. Pemberton's daughter Margaret appeared in the intensive care unit doorway. She had been maintaining a vigil at her mother's bedside for over 18 hours, watching helplessly as conventional treatments failed to improve her mother's condition. Her eyes were red from crying, and her clothes were wrinkled from sleeping in hospital chairs. "Dr. Hawthorne," Margaret said, her voice barely containing her desperation. "The nurses told me you're trying a new treatment approach. Please tell me there's some reason for hope. I can't lose my mother, not like this, not to some mysterious poison that no one understands." Vincent looked at Elena, recognizing that this was the moment when their unconventional collaboration would either gain acceptance or face rejection from the families whose trust they needed to continue the treatment. "Margaret, we are indeed trying a different approach based on traditional healing methods that have been successful against similar poisoning cases in the past. Elena, who has been part of our hospital staff for many years, has knowledge of medicinal plants that may be effective against the toxin affecting your mother." Margaret studied Elena with surprise, clearly trying to reconcile her perception of the quiet cleaning woman with the role of medical healer. "Elena, I've seen you working in the hospital for years, but I never knew you had medical knowledge. Are you confident that your treatment can help my mother?" Elena met Margaret's gaze with the same quiet confidence she had maintained throughout the crisis. "Mrs. Margaret, I cannot promise that your mother will recover completely, because healing is always uncertain. But I can promise that the medicine I have given her has saved other people who were dying from the same type of poisoning. Your mother is a strong woman with much love surrounding her, and that strength will help the medicine work." As Elena spoke, the monitoring equipment connected to Mrs. Pemberton began showing more pronounced improvements. Her oxygen saturation levels were rising, her heart rhythm was becoming more regular, and her blood pressure was stabilizing within normal ranges. The changes were clear enough that even Margaret could see the difference on the electronic displays. "My mother's numbers are improving," Margaret said with growing excitement. "Elena, what exactly did you give her, and how did you know it would work when all the modern medicines failed?" Elena began preparing the second dose of antidote, while explaining her background and training to Margaret. "Mrs. Margaret, my grandmother was a traditional healer in Honduras who specialized in treating people who had been poisoned by plants that grow in our mountains. She taught me that nature provides both poisons and antidotes, but the antidotes are often found in combinations of plants that work together in ways that single medicines cannot match." Dr. Foster approached with exciting news from her ongoing analysis of the patient's blood samples. "Vincent, the latest laboratory results show that the concentration of Aconitum Rex compounds is decreasing in all 12 patients. The rate of decrease is accelerating, which suggests that Elena's antidote is not just neutralizing the poison, but actually enhancing the body's natural detoxification processes." Vincent felt a surge of professional vindication combined with personal humility, as he realized that Elena's traditional knowledge had succeeded where all his expertise and technology had failed. Amanda, this is exactly what we hope to see. Elena's antidote appears to be working through mechanisms that our conventional treatments never addressed. Elena administered the second round of doses to all 12 patients, again providing each person with individualized encouragement and spiritual support that complemented the chemical action of the plant medicines. Her approach was generating a sense of hope and positive energy throughout the intensive care unit that was noticeably affecting not just the patients but also their families and the medical staff. As Elena worked, she explained more about her grandmother's healing philosophy and the principles that guided traditional medicine. My grandmother always said that people get sick not just in their bodies but in their spirits as well. Modern hospitals are very good at treating bodies, but sometimes they forget that healing requires addressing fear, loneliness, and despair. The plants I use help with physical symptoms, but the words and attention I give each patient help heal their spirits. Margaret, who had been watching her mother's steady improvement with growing amazement, found herself deeply moved by Elena's holistic approach to healing. Elena, in all the years I've been bringing my mother to this hospital, no one has ever spoken to her the way you do. Even when she was unconscious, you talked to her like she could hear and understand everything you were saying. Elena smiled, remembering her grandmother's teachings about the spiritual dimensions of healing that medical schools rarely addressed. Mrs. Swift, Margaret, my grandmother taught me that unconscious people can often hear more than conscious people realize. The spirit is always listening, always choosing whether to fight for life or to surrender to death. When I speak to patients, I am talking to their spirits as much as to their bodies. The third and final round of antidote doses was administered 6 hours after the first, and by this time the improvements in all 12 patients were undeniable. Mrs. Pemberton had regained consciousness and was breathing without mechanical assistance. James Mitchell was alert and asking questions about his condition. Sarah Chen, the pediatric nurse, was sitting up in bed and asking when she could return to work. Vincent stood in the center of the intensive care unit, watching the miraculous recovery taking place around him, and felt his understanding of medicine fundamentally challenged and expanded. Elena, what you have accomplished here goes beyond anything I learned in medical school or experienced in 25 years of practice. Your grandmother's knowledge has saved 12 lives that I was certain were lost. Elena finished her work and quietly began collecting her traditional preparation tools, her manner remaining humble despite the extraordinary success of her intervention. Dr. Hawthorne, my grandmother always taught me that healers are just servants of the healing power that flows through all living things. I did not save these patients. The plants saved them with help from their own body's wisdom and their family's love. I just remembered what my grandmother taught me about bringing all these healing forces together. Robert approached Elena with an expression of genuine respect that replaced his earlier skepticism. Elena, I owe you an apology for doubting the value of your traditional knowledge. What you have accomplished here has not only saved lives, but also taught us important lessons about healing that our modern medical system had forgotten. Dr. Foster was already making plans for documenting and studying Elena's methods so that other medical centers could benefit from the traditional knowledge she had shared. Elena, would you be willing to work with our research team to help us understand more about your grandmother's healing methods? There may be other traditional remedies that could help patients when conventional treatments are ineffective. Elena considered Amanda's request while reflecting on her grandmother's teachings about sharing knowledge responsibly. Dr. Foster, my grandmother always said that healing knowledge should be preserved and shared, but only with people who would use it wisely and respectfully. If you are committed to learning about traditional healing in a way that honors its origins and supports the communities where this knowledge comes from, then I would be happy to share what I know. Vincent realized that Elena's emergence as a traditional healer represented an opportunity to transform not just their approach to toxicology, but their entire understanding of what medicine could be when it integrated ancient wisdom with modern knowledge. Elena, I would like to offer you a permanent position as our Director of Traditional Medicine and Ethnobotanical Research. Your knowledge and skills are far too valuable to remain hidden in a cleaning position. Elena looked around the intensive care unit at the patients she had helped save, the families whose hope she had restored, and the medical team whose understanding she had expanded, and she felt her grandmother's spirit smiling with approval. The traditional knowledge that had been passed down through generations of healers had found new purpose in a modern setting, bridging ancient wisdom with contemporary medicine in ways that would benefit countless future patients. 6 months later, the Hawthorne Medical Institute had become the world's leading center for integrative medicine, combining cutting-edge technology with traditional healing methods from indigenous cultures around the globe. Elena had established a department of traditional medicine that attracted researchers and healers from every continent, creating a new model for medical education that honored both scientific rigor and ancestral wisdom. The story of the mysterious poisoning and Elena's life-saving antidote had inspired medical institutions worldwide to reconsider their assumptions about healing and to seek out traditional knowledge that had been overlooked or dismissed by conventional medicine. Elena's grandmother's wooden box of medicinal plants had become the seed for a revolution in medical thinking that promised to transform healthcare for generations to come. Standing in her new laboratory, watching young medical students learn to prepare traditional remedies alongside modern pharmaceuticals, Elena reflected on the journey that had brought her from invisible cleaning woman to respected healer and teacher. Sometimes, she thought, the most powerful medicine was simply the wisdom to see healing possibilities that existed beyond the boundaries of what people thought they knew about the nature of life, death, and the mysterious forces that connected them both. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.